Good afternoon and welcome to a rather obviously titled segment, In Conversation With. This segment is specially designed to showcase the backstories and journeys of individuals who have made an impact in their fields of expertise. Luminary Learning Solutions crafted this segment to offer you the advantage of drawing inspiration for your own personal journey. I'm Anton Thayalan, the Chief Evangelist and co-host this hour. Our founder and destiny architect, Vidusha Nathavitharana, the host for the afternoon, and we'll take you through an hour of free-flowing discussion. For today's segment on In Conversation With, it is my privilege to introduce Joe McDonald. He is an experienced, qualified professional coach and trainer who is passionate about supporting individuals, teams, and organizations in fulfilling their potential. A highly experienced individual at senior management and director level with a proven ability to enhance others to performance and impact. He is the founder of Create 10, which provides exceptional leadership and team performance training and executive coaching, professional online educational programs, and life coaching. Create 10 works with business professionals in finance, HR, corporate, health, engineering, and tech, all of whom are ambitious in terms of individual and collective performance. And on that note, Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me on the show. It's lovely to see you guys.
It is our pleasure, Joe. Just to set context, and I have loads of questions and some I know I'm not supposed to ask, and I'm not going to put you on the spot with Vidusha here, but take us back to who Joe McDonald was. Take us back to your early life. What was it like growing up, Joe?
Okay, wow, that's going back some time. I grew up in Dublin, Ireland, and I grew up in a household where both my parents worked very hard. My father would have worked 6 days a week. My mother worked Monday to Friday. I suppose when I think about influences on my life, one of my earliest memories is my mother worked with children from disadvantaged parts of the city, and the particular charity or organization that she worked for had a second-hand double-decker bus. So if you think of London and the big red double-decker buses, this organization had an old double-decker bus, and what they used to do was they used to put toys on the bus, and my mother used to bring the bus, this double-decker bus, out to disadvantaged parts of the city to allow children who had no toys of their own to play with them. And for me, I was a young child and I'd be brought along, and at that early stage I was kind of fascinated in terms of watching these children develop when perhaps they didn't have the best opportunities in life. In my teens, I played a lot of sport, and I was always fascinated in the topic of kind of leadership. Why is it that some members of the team would demonstrate leadership characteristics as such, where other members of the team would be beaten before the match even started? And that was something of interest to me. In my early career, I would have worked in the area of health and social care. So I would have worked with individuals that, for example, had acquired brain injury. So people that have been in car crashes and industrial accidents and so on. And as a consequence of that, it had a significant setback in life. So I worked with teams in terms of helping them to relearn skills and to improve their mindset so they could get back to have a quality of life. And then as my career progressed, then I began to lead teams and run organizations, large organizations with very large budgets. But throughout my entire life, I've been just fascinated with the whole area of leadership and human potential, regardless of who you are or where you come from or what discipline or field you're working in.
Wow. I mean, really interesting exposure as a young man growing up. And I noticed in in your profiles, and you've got varied qualifications. You've clearly made a conscious effort to get degrees and qualifications and certifications in any number of areas, right? What was the thinking behind that? Why did you make that effort?
I suppose I would have come from a working class family, so the opportunity to go straight from school to university wasn't an option. I had to go straight into the workplace. So I went from school into the workplace, worked hard, and I very quickly realized that in order to fulfill my potential, I needed to educate myself further. So what I did was I studied part-time whilst working full-time. And I suppose, Anton, like many of us, it was an incremental realization that as I achieved each qualification, it started off with a certificate, of course, and then a diploma, and then a Bachelor of Arts degree, and subsequently I've gone on, and I had the privilege of meeting Vidusha in the UK whilst in 2013 when we did a master's degree in leading innovation and change. And I've subsequently gone on and done a second master's degree in personal and management coaching. And I suppose it's about that notion of working on the edge of your capability and allowing yourself to be vulnerable. You know, I think if we're always comfortable, then we don't grow, we don't develop, and that's something I try to bring to the conversations that I have with my clients, whether that's with an organization, a team, or an individual, that we have to be willing and we have to be brave to move to the edge of our current level of capability, and to explore with curiosity what's preventing us from going beyond that. Because inevitably what we do is when we push through that, we come to a new realization that we're capable of far more than we initially thought.
Joe, can I quickly butt in, and thank you for coming on board. I just want to follow up with what Anton was talking about, because I think you and I share very similar childhoods and upbringings. Hard work was something that I think got instilled very, very early on. But most of us, especially when we come from that kind of background, reach a certain level of success. And in comparison, it's a good place to be. And 9 times out of 10, that becomes enough. There's a little nagging feeling inside your head that says, maybe you can do more, but then you really don't want to push it. And most people get pretty comfortable, pretty complacent there. And I'm not passing judgment on that in any way. But I just want to find out, what is it that pushes you beyond that? What is it that would kind of tell, yes, I know I'm perfectly fine where I am, but I think I can do a little bit more. Where does that come from?
I suppose it's just a belief I have, Vidusha, that we never reach a finish line. You know, it's you know, even when my days are past and I leave this earth, I won't have achieved everything that I'm capable of. And I suppose it's about the journey, isn't it? Really. You know, I suppose one of the things I'd say to organizations and to individuals is, you know, let's just take an organization for a moment that is fantastic in their field. They're, you know, they're exceptional at what they do. If we allow complacency to come in, that they believe that they're the finished article, then they're left behind. Because what happens is their competitors and other organizations in their field, they're constantly innovating. They're constantly, as I said, working on the edge of their capability and pushing through that. I'm not necessarily competitive. I suppose what I would say is that I'm competitive with myself in terms of I want to be the best that I can be. I don't measure myself against others. Of course, I'm constantly looking outwards and looking for inspiration. But you know, like the collaboration that I'm doing with you guys today, it's not about saying you guys are better than me, I'm better than you, and so on. It's about mutual learning, and to say, right, what is it that you guys, if there's one or two statements or sentences that I can take from today and think, wow, that was powerful, that was useful, then it was a worthwhile experience. And for me, that's what it's about.
How do you push through that though? From an organizational perspective, Joe, I think both of us share very similar work as well. So it's very easy to kind of have this conversation. Because when we work with organizations, you have a vision, you have a mission, you have objectives, and there's a whole management hierarchy sitting on top, pushing these initiatives through. But when it comes to individual, which is why I'm I'm always very curious with coaches who work with individuals as well as organizations. Because in an organization, when you kind of say something, there are marching orders that are spelled out. For an individual, you are your own general, you are also your own foot soldier. You know, and 9 times out of 10, when your manager gives you a set of objectives, that becomes part of your job and you get on with it, you don't think twice. But when it comes to your own self, and if you don't have someone who tells you, you know what, Joe, that you can do better than this, why not explore this or why not explore that? How do you find, or how do you tell one of your clients to seek within? How do you start on that journey as an individual without someone prompting you?
Okay, for me, there's 2 elements to it. The first is self-awareness, and then the second part of it is responsibility. What are you going to do with the new insights that you have? So a typical scenario with the clients that I have is I would ask them to tell me, similar to what Anton did this morning, I would ask them to tell me their story. Okay, so we would go through the family they grow up in, positive experience, the negative experiences, their schooling, their career, things that have gone well in their life, things that haven't gone so well in their life. And the way in which somebody tells their story gives a valuable insight in terms of, first of all, how they view the world, but also in terms of that inner landscape, in terms of how they view themselves. Okay. And by simply listening to the story and asking powerful questions, it's a case where clients will discover new aspects of themselves, or perhaps elements of themselves that they kept in the shadows, that we bring out and we look at with curiosity. What we do then is, with these new insights, we then explore how to address them. And I suppose there's different ways. So there are a number of different tools that we would use. For example, we would look at what are the most important aspects of an individual's personal life. We would look at what are the most important aspects of a person's professional life. And then we would look at their current level of satisfaction across all of those. We would then choose some of those and develop action plans around those. And this is where the individual takes responsibility themselves. So essentially, there's typically 2 ways in which we can address this. One is to identify those obstacles, those things that are preventing us from achieving more than we currently are, and develop strategies to navigate our way around those or to remove those obstacles. The other approach is to adopt a positive psychology approach, where instead of focusing on the obstacles, instead we're looking at all of the things that are going well professionally and personally, and we look to do more of that. Okay, so there are some of those kind of threads that we would look at. Another thing that we would look at is the whole notion of values, because you mentioned there about mission statements and values, and the sad reality is that organizations have mission statements and values, but if you talk to 99% of their workforce, they have no idea what it is. They might have a rough sense of it, but it's not meaningful to them. Okay, so in terms of the work that I would do with clients, we would explore what individuals' values are, and then we would see if those align with the organization in which they're working, or we would explore ways in which we can align both of those in terms of their organization's values and their own, and in doing so their work then is more meaningful. if that makes sense.
Right. Joe, thanks, Joe. Just taking on from Vidusha's point and your comments, I do understand that you do want to help individuals, and I see the difference between how you work with organizations and individuals within the organizations, right? But here is a question for you, which is, every now and then you will find individuals who want to grow, or they say they want to grow, but really deep down, they don't put in that full effort. No matter what you show in, they don't put in that effort to showcase the fact that they do want to grow. How do you actually help someone who is like that? How do you convince someone about that they do have better potentials, that they can go on to do more things than what they do right now? How do you move someone like that to actually go for it and go about doing their work?
Yeah, it's a good question, Anton, because sometimes there is a reluctance. And I suppose the first thing is to look at what is the reason for the reluctance. Is it because they have proposed things in the past and they've been knocked back? Is it because they've been unfairly criticized by their boss? Is it because they lack confidence or don't have the skills? So we need to drill down in terms of why is there a hesitancy there? Some of it is day-to-day stuff that goes on in organizations. Some of it is perhaps deeper than that. Maybe it's insecurity from childhood. So it's about looking at the reasons behind. Okay. The second thing then is to recognize that where somebody's lacking confidence, the goals that we co-create, and that's very important. It isn't a case of Joe ever coming in and telling a client what they need to do. What I do is I support individuals in discovering solutions for themselves. So the way I would put it is, you know, when I'm having a coaching conversation with somebody, so Anton, if I was having a coaching conversation with you, you're driving the car. So you'll decide what direction we'll go in, and you'll determine you'll decide how fast we go. All right. So there's a couple of things here. The first thing is, in order to start somebody moving in the right direction, we need to be able to define success. What is it ultimately that they want to achieve? And you reverse engineer from there. Okay. The second thing is to set those short-term achievable goals. We need some wins, some early wins, because what happens is when you get early wins, you create movement, and then with more wins comes momentum. Okay, so you're going from a stationary position to movement, and then ultimately momentum. And once you create momentum, then it's a whole different conversation. What we're looking at then is, instead of setting absolute goals, we're setting minimum targets. And I actually wrote a blog about this only this week. And if I might just give an example of this. So if I were working with a sales team, a decision might be taken in January of this year that, okay, over the next 12 months, we want to do $1 million in sales. Okay. So what happens is the sales team sets out to try and achieve $1 million in sales throughout from January to December 2021. What happens is, if they get to the midpoint of the year after 6 months and they've achieved €750,000 $750,000 in sales, what they do is they take their foot off the pedal, they begin to relax, they think, you know, it's no problem, we're going to meet the target. Come December, they just about reach their $1 million target. High fives, pats on the back, they might get a bit of a bonus, job well done. Okay. The reason why that happened was they set the absolute goal of achieving $1 million in sales. So what I encourage individuals and organizations to do is to set minimum targets. And it's just the language that we're using around this stuff. So in this instance, what this sales team is saying is that we will achieve a minimum of $1 million in sales. It's that limitless mindset. Okay. And I've applied this to my own life, not just in terms of finances, but in terms of, you know, educational achievement, in terms of clients numbers, client engagement, in terms of physical health, in terms of relationships and so on, that if we set those minimum targets instead of absolute goals, we tend to achieve more than we initially anticipated, because we place these, what's the word I'm looking for? We're overly conservative. We underestimate what we are capable of. And if we bring it back, Anton, to the initial question around individuals, for me, it's about developing those good habits that improve performance. Because if I spent a week with you, Anton, and looked at your habits, I could probably, if I looked at your habits for the next 7 days, I could probably predict where you're going to end up in about 5 years' time. Okay? And so it's about looking at our habits, what habits are serving us well, what habits aren't, bringing it back, Vidusha, to that self-awareness piece. And then when we develop that self-awareness around those habits that are serving us well and those habits that aren't, then we can adjust, take responsibility for new actions, new ways of thinking, new ways of behaving, and we improve our performance. In terms of developing new habits, I would always recommend to individuals to try and link new habits to existing good habits. So, for example, there's a lot of research at the moment around COVID-19 and vitamin D. So you guys are fortunate, you live in a sunny climate where there's lots of vitamin D, yeah? That isn't the case here, all right? So it doesn't get bright here till 9 o'clock in the morning. It's dark by about 5 o'clock in the evening this time of year, and it's cloudy throughout the day, very little sunshine, okay? So we should be taking a vitamin D supplement. So if with a client, for example, they decide they want to take a vitamin D supplement, you pair that with a good habit that they do every day. So for example, what do we all do every day? We brush our teeth. So what you do is you put the vitamin D supplements beside your toothbrush so that you say to yourself, I am not allowed to brush my teeth until I take my vitamin D tablet. So there's an example of how you pair a new behavior with an already established one, and you develop good habits. You can apply that, guys, to workplace settings. That, you know, before you sit down, before you turn on your computer, what do? You know, before you attend it, before you go to your supervision session, what's the new habit you want to incorporate there, and so on. There's thousands of examples that we could use.
No, that was pretty interesting, because I think that sets context to a lot of the problems that we face, isn't it? Because ultimately, it's very easy for people to turn around and say, this is what we need to do. I think cognitively, we all understand what needs to be done. The difficult part is actually making that part of the behavior. And that's when the roadblock happens. Is it frustrating, though, to be a coach? Because you are, and you rightly said, right? A client is always in the passenger seat, and not on the passenger seat, but in the driving seat. You are the one who's setting the direction, and I'm deciding how fast I go. And you're in the passenger seat, watching this unfold, and you know sometimes instinctively, this guy is capable of a hell of a lot more than what he's willing to commit to. Does it get frustrating?
You certainly have to manage yourself. So there are times when I'll be doing a coaching session with somebody, and like I might coach somebody that is a global director of a multinational company, or I might be doing a coaching session with a startup company, you know, a guy starting up his own business. And there are times when we're exploring a problem or a challenge, and to me the solution is quite obvious. But in a coaching conversation, my role is to simply ask the question so the individual can come to their own solutions. And you know, by individuals coming to their own solutions, they're more invested in terms of their implementation. So there are times if somebody is absolutely stuck, what I will say to them is, okay, Vidusha, we've been exploring this for the last 15 minutes. I may have a solution here. With your permission, can I put this on the table? And if you choose to take it from the table and use it, then that's fine. If you decide that you want to leave it on the table and not take it, equally that's okay. So I actually ask your permission before I give you advice. And you will know from your extensive work around leadership, guys, that one of the main problems that leaders have is with staff coming to them with problems all of the time and leaders feeling they have to provide the solution. It doesn't work. With globalization, complexity of organizations, it is impossible for leaders to have, for one leader to have all of the answers to all of the problems. It just doesn't work. I've led very small organizations with maybe 10 or 20 individuals. You might be able to get away with it at that level. But once you're going into larger organizations, 100, 1,000, 50,000 staff, it's impossible. So if I might just suggest a coaching type conversation that for anybody that's in a leadership position or in a management position, type of conversation, I'll give you two examples of a conversation: good practice, bad practice, and good practice. Okay, so bad practice is, Anton, you report to me, you come to me with a problem, and I provide you with the solution. So you say to me, that's great, boss, thanks, and off you go, and you half-heartedly implement the solution. And you know what, if it doesn't work, it doesn't really matter, because it wasn't your ideas, it was your boss's idea. Okay? So recently, actually, I had a coaching session with a guy who's highly successful working for a multinational organization, and he's in charge of European affairs. And I asked him what his greatest challenge was at the moment, and he said his greatest challenge was that he had a really high caliber leadership team reporting to him, but they kept coming to him with their problems. So he was spending his days sorting out problems rather than focusing on the work that he should have been doing. Okay, so I said, talk to me about the type of conversation. So imagine one of these leaders, one of these staff in the leadership team comes into your office. What happens? And he said, well, they'll come into the office, I'll ask them to take a seat, and they'll say, look, I have a problem at the moment. I'll say to them, what is the problem? They'll tell me the problem. I'll think for a few moments, and then I'll suggest to them what they need to do to resolve it. And I said, what happens then? They say, that's great, thanks very much, and off they go. Okay. And I said, well, there's your problem. And he said, what is it? I said, you're engaging in conversations that actually is encouraging your leadership team to constantly come to you with problems. So I said, let's try a different approach. So I recommended to him to try, it's a very simple coaching conversation called the GROW approach. Okay. So Anton, you come to me with a problem, you're giving out about something, you're stuck, it's not going anywhere. And rather than me jump in with the solution, what I say to you is, okay, Anton, what is it specifically that you're trying to achieve? What's the goal here? Okay, so GROW is an acronym, okay, and the G stands for goal. So what is the goal here that you're trying to achieve? Or what specifically do you want to take from this conversation? All right, so G is goal. Then I'll say to you, okay, the R stands for reality. So tell me again, what's the reality at the moment? And you'll say, oh, this is a mess, that person isn't listening to me, blah, 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 whatever. Okay. Then I'll say to you, okay, oh, what are the options that you have? One option is to keep doing what you're doing. How's that going for you? You'll say it's a disaster. Okay. What other options do you have? And you'll initially just throw ideas off the top of your head. And normally they're not of a great quality. No disrespect to Anton, but normally the ideas we just throw out initially aren't very good. Okay. So I sit patiently, and when he's emptied the tank, I say to him, okay, and what else? What else? What else? So then you begin to sit back. You look inwards, you're thinking, you're cognitively actually engaged in the problem, and you're generating better quality solutions. Okay? Then the final element of the grow conversation is W, which means what are you willing to commit to? So say, okay, you've told me what the specific goal is. You've told me what your reality at the moment is. We've looked at all of these options. Some of them aren't great, some of them are really good. What are you willing to commit to? Okay. What time frame are we going to put around that? You're going to keep me updated. And crucially, what can I do to support you in the implementation of the solution? Okay. And this guy that I was coaching implemented that strategy. And we had a coaching session a month later. I said, how are you getting on? He said, it's fabulous. He said, I now have a leadership team that's generating solutions, okay, and far better solutions than he could have come up with himself. And he was now allowed to work on the system as opposed to being dragged into the system all of the time.
No, that makes perfect sense. And one of the things that often when we have conversations as well, if nothing else, just at least come up with two alternatives. Don't just come with a problem, is something one of my former bosses used to always drum into us. And I must admit, we used to laugh at him and say, we used to take the mickey out of him ever so often, saying, you know, the boss doesn't know either, you know. And he was completely comfortable with that. And his answer was always, I'm not here to solve your problems. You're there to solve your problems. So come up with alternatives and we'll sit down and discuss what would work. And that's absolutely true, because that propagates a certain behavior, isn't it? And after that deep roots itself in the culture, the fastest route to anything is take the problem to the boss. And if he says something, just get on with it. And that just becomes hardwired. That's interesting because in a way, though, I think we as parents, and especially in the subcontinent, from where we are, I think we have a tendency to give answers to our kids. And that, I think, is the starting point of all of this. If you don't know something, go up to a person rather than think about it yourself. So, Dad, should I do this? Or Mom, should I do this? And it happens consistently. So from a coaching perspective, are we at fault as parents too?
Vidusha, can I suggest to you, if you know, I think you've got teenage kids.
Yes.
Yeah. Have a grow conversation with your teenage kids the next time they're giving out about school, their teacher, or they're giving out about how awful their life is. So, you know, if a teenager comes home and is giving out about their teachers, say to them, well, what is it that you're trying to specifically achieve? What would be a good outcome for you here? What's the reality again? What options do you have? Anything else? Anything else? Anything else? Okay, what are you willing to do? What are you willing to change? And it moves them from this negativity into a solution-focused mindset.
Absolutely. I was about to ask you that. As much as in offices, I think it must be done at home as well, isn't it? Because I think if you do it at home, it comes instinctively at workplaces as well, and not only just as leaders and your teams, but also as parents, or even in a relationship. If when you're going through a negative spiral, if you actually switch on to this mode, it's a far more meaningful conversation to have. It's all right to vent, I guess, but venting doesn't get you anywhere. So at some point, the conversation has to be directed towards looking at options. And very, very importantly, what are you willing to commit to? And once that commitment is made, to see that you follow through on it. So the question, I think, what I've always been trying to ask people is, why is it that we don't actually teach this more often in either schools or somewhere before we become adults? Because I think if we learn it as kids, we hardwire ourselves into looking inwards more often than simply going and asking someone for advice or for solutions.
It's a big question. I think there's a number of challenges. I think some of it is cultural. So there are parts of the world where it's, if your leader doesn't provide you with a solution, they're seen as weak. I think some of it is down to self-esteem, that when I provide you with a solution, even if it's an awful solution, I still think, hey, I'm the man. Yeah. but it's counterproductive.
Oh, I agree.
The reason being as well is that if you adopt that coaching approach to your leadership, you actually enhance and build relationships. Your staff will feel more valued as well, because they'll feel that you're listening to them, and that you value their opinion. So I think some of it is because of selfish reasons around self-esteem. So some of it is cultural. Also, having a coaching conversation when you're not used to it feels a little bit cumbersome initially, until you get used to it. But once you get used to it, it just flows. Like I can have a coaching conversation now with family or clients, and they're completely unaware that I'm using a coaching approach. It's just, they just don't see it. But the outcomes are far more positive from a relationship point of view and from an outcomes perspective as well.
Anna, can I quickly switch on to a more personal question and then pass it on to Anton? All of this and growing up the way you did, and when you bring up kids, and given that you are a coach, but also given the fact that we are human as well, where do you draw the line between seeing something that you really need to intervene as a dad and saying, hold on, maybe I should allow him or her to, try it out for themselves and figure it out? Where do you draw that line, and how do you draw that line? Because I think that's a problem most parents face.
Sure, absolutely. I suppose if we think back throughout our own lives, okay, you're both very well qualified guys, okay, so you've learned as a result of your studies, but I suspect that you probably learned more by your failures and your mistakes. Yeah, I know I have. So we can try to wrap our children or our teams in cotton wool and try and create failure-free environments, but we're setting them up for disaster, because it's inevitable that at some point in our personal and professional lives, we're going to make mistakes. We're not going to achieve what we set out to do. But what we need to do is create the climate at home, in our homes and in our workplaces, where mistakes happen, or where we fail, if you want to use that word, that they're treated as individual and collective learning opportunities. Because where one child has failed, there's a learning opportunity, certainly for that child, but also maybe for the other children in the household. Similarly, in the workplace, if I'm working as part of a team and I've made a dreadful error, rather than viewing that as a career-threatening disaster, if we look at that with some compassion and curiosity is an important word. It creates that learning opportunity, yes, for the person, but for the wider team. If you look at space travel, for example, or aviation, they're two industries that have a kind of whistleblowing policy, and if anybody makes a mistake, they want people to be open about that and say, when I left the International Space Station, I made a mistake. I got away with it. I wasn't hurt. There were no negative consequences, but I'm telling you, I made this mistake. Why did they do that? They don't do it because they want to criticize the astronaut. They do it because if somebody else were to make that same mistake, the next time it could kill somebody. Okay? So organizations need to create cultures where people are allowed, as I said, work on the edge of their capability, because that's where we grow and develop and improve individually and collectively, allowed to make mistakes, look at them as learning opportunities for the individual and for the organization. And the same applies to our children.
Thanks, Joe. You actually kind of covered something that I did want to ask you about, which was the risk of failure that generally people tend to hide behind instead of sort of driving forward or realizing their full potential. Thank you for that. Just following up from what Vidusha mentioned earlier on about youngsters, youth, and I guess that is a crucial area to look at now with more and more youngsters stepping into the corporate world. And at the same time, you also see a lot of youngsters who come out of school and they're on this drive to go on and get as many certifications and degrees as possible at a stretch, even some right up to the point of going after an MBA just because they've done the bachelor's. But while that is academically strong, in terms of self-development, what is the kind of advice or your thoughts on youngsters, and how do you kind of get these youngsters to continue to develop themselves on an ongoing basis and not to just drop the ball because you've got a certificate in your hand?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, Vidusha, this is something that you're quite strong on as well. We can all attend training and complete courses, but it's how we integrate that, how we assimilate that into who we are as human beings that's so important. So for example, the online courses that I provide through Create 10, I provide coaching then to those individuals to help them to integrate the learning into their actual personal and professional lives. Okay, with young kids out of school, and I'm of that generation where they seem to be getting younger and younger, I would always recommend serve others. You know, serve others. Go and you know, go and do some voluntary work. Go to the most undervalued member of staff in your organization and learn from them. You know, there's lots of organizations that if the chief executive doesn't turn up for 3 days, nobody would notice. But if the cleaner that empties that cleans the staff canteen or cleans the toilets doesn't turn up for 3 days, the place would be in crisis. Okay, so it's about recognizing the value of all staff and all organizational levels. So my recommendation to particularly young kids, straight out of school, maybe straight out of university, is to serve others. Because with that comes humility and learning. Okay. The other thing I would suggest is we're training kids, for example, to be goal orientated. Okay. That it's good to be goal orientated, and of course it is. However, what can happen sometimes with individuals and teams and organizations is they become so goal orientated that it's as if they have blinkers on, and what they do is they fail to recognize other opportunities that could arise because they're singularly focused. You know, so it's about looking at characteristics, like, you know, if we broaden that, for example, to a team, we say that rapport, getting on with each other, is very important. Yeah, because if there's conflict all of the time, we won't succeed. But if there's too much rapport, then we have groupthink. Then we're afraid to challenge one another. Then we're afraid to say, Vidusha, you know, I'm not so sure about that idea. Can we look at alternatives? Because we value our friendship more than we do the objectives that we're trying to achieve. So going back to the young person starting in their career, I would suggest to them to identify the characteristics that they wanted to develop, such as goal attainment and so on, but to look at the other side of the coin as well, to see if there's development there too. It's, you know, I'm qualified in terms of doing personality tests with people as well. So people will typically do a personality test, and Anton might be, you know, he might love collaboration, and he's a great team player. Okay, I'm sure you are, but it's about exploring the other side and say, okay, why is there a hesitancy to work alone? Why is there a hesitancy to take responsibility for tasks by yourself? I'm not suggesting you are. This is obviously, you know, me making stuff up here, but Personality tests, similar. It's about looking at those aspects of ourselves that we tend to shy away from, so that we develop more holistically. Because if we develop more holistically, then we're more effective as human beings, more effective in our relationships, and we're far more effective in our jobs.
Completely agree with that. Absolutely.
You've nailed that. Thank you, Joe, for that. Joe, we are mindful of time, and as with all good things, generally everything must come to an end. So while we thank you for your time, I know it's early morning in Ireland. Just a quick roundup to say we were in conversation with Joe McDonald, the founder of Create 10. Create 10 specializes in management consulting, public speaking, career development coaching, team building, leadership development, interview preparation, and change management, to name a few. This was an hour designed to bring inspiration through the backstories of modern day icons. So Joe, once again, thank you very, very much for giving us your time, for being with us this afternoon, and for sharing so much of insight. And I think there's a valuable nugget for all of us to take away. I can honestly say that this has been a thrilling ride. Some interesting stories, and certainly an amazing takeaway of pure inspiration. So for everyone joining in, do watch our social media spaces for the links to join in. And it'll be up on our YouTube channel. So do visit, do subscribe, and hit that notification button to stay updated, and remember to share. On that note, I bid you a wonderful rest of the day. Stay safe, stay productive.